I really hope you enjoyed the first part of my chat with Laura Massaro, and part two is about to begin. But some of the topics we go a little bit deeper on is around softening the mental approach and how she was able to do this effectively. And something that I notice a lot with some of the players I'm working with about perfectionism and training really hard and expecting the results and, almost being owed the result. And we talk about how she was able to soften that mental approach and how this also built her self belief and her self esteem, and she highlights it brilliantly with a few funny stories of the tour and what she was doing to soften the mental approach. So I think you'll definitely enjoy that. We have a real in depth look at the Enneagram, the personality type indicator that was a massive part of her success, she believes, and getting her to understand herself and how this all linked up, and how then she worked with her sports psychologist taking big deep looks at this. We touch on a bit of hypnosis. We talk about visualizations and actually how she wasn't using visualizations massively in her career, but part of it was with injury rehabilitation. And we discuss a few little things around that, and my few little sense in regard to what I think visualizations are useful now. We unfortunately didn't get into a few things around goal setting and how to prepare mentally for match play because, again, there was just so much good to talk about. She shares a really cool story with Mark Campbell, her personal trainer or physical trainer, and how he was able to trick her into achieving something quite big, and how this actually had a rollover and a spillover effect into some of her performances. And we also take a look more at her upcoming book. And a big part of releasing these podcasts at these times is to give all of you a call to arms, a call to action to go and buy the book. For me, it sounds absolutely brilliant, and I cannot wait to order it. As soon as the pre-orders come out, I am jumping all over that, because she gives her insights into the amount of attention to detail she's put into this book and how it's been a massive passion project of hers. And if her career and trajectory of what she's done is anything to go by, I think this book is just going to be a wonderful, insightful, really deep experience into Laura, who she is, her character traits, and I think it's only going to be a massive success. And I, for one, am massively looking forward to it. So without further ado, please enjoy the second part of my conversation with Laura Massaro. So something that you talked about on part one of the podcast was this idea about softening your mental approach, and a few people I've been working with have really resonated to that idea where you talked about softening your mental approach. Can we have a talk on this, and can you expand what that was like for you, and how that really impacted your career, and what part of the career were you in when you had to do that?
Yeah, I think softening off of the mentality was probably cutting yourself a little bit of slack, isn't it? And making sure that you're giving yourself a little bit of a break. I think we talked a lot about the training, the mindset, trying to hit every single part of what it means to be a professional athlete, and then wanting to having this expectation to win basically. And, I deserve more because of this. And it's particularly hard when you see players around your level or age not doing something as professionally as you are, but getting better results because maybe they're a better player at the time. And that's the thing, isn't it? Mindset is one part of a lot of things. And so trying to soften off and forgive yourself, cut yourself a little bit of slack. I remember having a conversation with Danny once over dinner, and he would say, if you take someone like Amma Shabana, who plays like it means nothing when it means everything, how do you get that mindset? And we had a really deep conversation about that one line. How do you play like it means nothing when it means everything? I mean, that's probably the key to the whole mindset, isn't it? I've just watched the Aussie Open tennis. So, looking back on some of those matches in tennis is bizarre. All the tennis matches you see, someone can be so far on top and be the best player by a mile and world number one, and they lose. And, it gets to everybody. And it's how do you play? Yeah, when it means everything, and how do you get that freedom? And I think that's the ultimate goal of mindset is, a lot of it is getting out of your own way, isn't it? Getting out of, what does that, it's just words. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Getting out of your own way.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to try bring it to. Just before I get to that point, I use an interesting quote from Shaun White, X Games dude who nailed this one move that they thought was impossible to win the Olympic gold, and he says being in the zone is about being fully immersed and focused on what you're doing, but also not caring. And it sounds like the Shavana thing. He's like, yes, I'm there, I'm in the moment, but actually, at a point, I don't care. I just take the reins off and go with it. So maybe link to that conversation you had with Danny around the dinner table. What specific examples did you try and do to then soften the mental approach? Was there a dedicated way you trained it, or did you just go in with a slightly different mindset to things?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's definitely getting out of your own way, meaning try not to take yourself too seriously and have those expectations. I mean, there's always an element of seriousness, professionalism. There's a fine line between professionalism and becoming very serious as a person. And
Mm.
I guess when you say serious, you mean there's not a lot of fun there. There's not a lot of enjoyment there. I mean, you can be serious and have fun and enjoyment, and then you can be serious and you can be rigid. Like there's a difference, isn't there, with the mindset, with how you go into practices. And I think the players that I've seen over the years, even though they take it as an element of professionalism into the training without the heaviness of and the burden of seriousness. I have to do this because this will equal this.
Mm-hmm.
You do it because, there's a flip and a switch of, I do it because I would really like that. And I guess that's another little line as well, isn't it? We worked heavily on this. I would really like that, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't need that.
Oh,
And
good.
that's a real difference, because when you need it,
Mm.
like Serena Williams trying to go for 24 or whatever it is, Grand Slams, she's played how many slams and can't get it. It's like she needs it, but she hasn't needed the 23 that have come before. She's just wanted them.
Yeah.
And so there's a playfulness, I think, that comes around wanting it but not needing it, because the minute you cross over from that to that wanting it to needing it, the playfulness goes, I think, and then the seriousness comes, and then that equals that. If I do that, that equals that. And life just doesn't work like that. If anything, it actually puts you down on your ass.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. I think you've hit on such an interesting topic there, because let's assume, and again, maybe hopefully not assuming too much, you're always going to give your utter best. You're being a professional, your benchmarks are there, your behaviors, your actions are here. So that's not the question. You don't need to push yourself harder to raise those. That is almost like the given. It is that you said, that softening, that maybe that flexing, that enjoying around that mental approach. Am I correct in saying that? Because I think the
Yeah.
idea of there is, you're here, and before we started recording, I'm talking about some of the players I'm working with who have that. They always going to turn up for training. They're always going to go to the gym. They always do everything above and beyond. So that's not what's in question. It's not a motivation thing. It's actually something slightly different. So what do you think on that?
Yeah, look, the one thing that I could never fault myself for a win or a loss, was lack of effort. And we get to the point where I'm with my coaches and the people that I'm working with, and after a match, they sit us down, they sit me down, and they go, "Look, we know you tried. It's a given.
Yeah.
That's not the point here anymore, is it? It's how do you get a better level out? We know that you've got a better level than that. So something is stopping you getting that level out." And that's where the seriousness in practice becomes, I don't know quite how to say it, but I guess when you've got that seriousness in practice, you can only ever hope to then just take that seriousness on the match court, and then tightness comes, nerve comes, flow isn't there. And I wasn't the most creative of flamboyant players, but I think when I was at my best, you could really see a lot of flow, and a lot of people say my movement was quite graceful. Robbo, I remember on a national squad saying to me, "You ghost exactly how you play."
Okay.
So I watch you ghost, and you could have a ball there the way you move.
Nice.
And that for me, it was a huge compliment, because that meant that what I was doing on the practice court in the ghosting was exactly what I wanted to do on the match court.
It's transferring.
Whereas sometimes when you see people ghosting, you're like, what is that? Is that even a squash movement? I mean, we're talking obviously probably more amateurs there, but if you can't ghost how you want to play, then obviously there's an issue there. And so it's linking the practice in. And I guess it's always nice to relate to a story, but actually I was thinking about this before our chat today, and there came a point in my career, and I think I can remember it. It was Dubai, and I think it was the first year, World Series Finals 2016. 2016, I think, and it was the final, and it had been Ramadan all week. My matches had finished after midnight most nights. I hadn't made breakfast all week. We were just, as everyone knows, that's a big prize pot, so it's no issue getting breakfast delivered to your room every morning. Get up about 11, have breakfast in the room, go for a late practice. Matches were always after 10 p.m. I was literally kind of on the wrong way around. And I played really well all week. And it was actually funny, because maybe we could talk about this in terms of going back to it, but I'd actually lost in the final of the World Championships to Noor Shabini about, I don't know, 4 weeks before. And Danny actually said to me, what are you going to do on the back of this result? You've got World Series finals in 3 or 4 weeks. You can't turn up there and want to win. If you turn up there and want to win, the work starts now. We're talking, a few days, a week after a world final loss from 2-0 up, by the way, talking about mental strength. Lost my world number one spot. Lost Noor Shabini won her first world title. She won a car as well as the prize money. What? It was like, talk about stood on the sidewall from 2-0 up with someone punch you in the face. And we can talk about that as a separate thing, but I actually really felt like I didn't believe I could win that final for various reasons. And this is where belief is such a strange thing, because I didn't believe I couldn't beat Shabini, but it had so much more wrapped up in that event, that final, that being world number one, losing my world number one spot, all that. So then I think that's relevant when I fast forward to a month later and I'm presented with World Series finals, top 8 in the world. My group is Nicole David, Amanda Sobey, Gohar maybe, make the semi, play Shabini, win, revenge my loss from a few weeks ago, whole point. And I'm now preparing for the final against Waneem. And I'm in my hotel room, and the car journey to the venue is 5 minutes, private car, go down, get one whenever you want. It's final anyway. There's only 4 players with the men. So I'm in my hotel room, and I'm strangely, weirdly, I don't know if this even links into the mindset. Maybe it's a girl thing. I decide that I'm going to French plait my hair. I don't know why. I think I'd played around with my hair all week, but from a mindset perspective, it felt like it looked nice. And I had this cool dress, this pink dress that I wore on this pink court. And I just was feeling good. And I put the dress on, and I was all ready to go down and get my coffee and do my pre-match notes. And I had a bit of music on in the room. And all of a sudden, I just thought, I just felt like dancing. And I'm like, like jigging along. And I don't dance. I'm not really that sort of person. There's no one in the room. Danny's gone. I'm French plaiting my hair, making sure I've got mirrors, checking it all looks good behind and all a lot. And it never happened before. But I just decided I wanted to dance. Now, when we talk about seriousness, that is not what you do before a World Series final. You take it seriously. You get your headphones on. You put your hair in a ponytail. You put your dress on. You don't care what you look like. You think about your game plan and you get down to the court.
Yeah.
But something in me that day was just like, I've done so well from where I was 2 weeks ago, from losing a World Championship final from 2-0 up, to the swing effect of, playing on Ramadan, getting late every night, playing really well all week, bouncing back, being in the final, and now feeling it's not the dancing that is the key here. It's what mood I must have been in to feel like that, totally. To feel like I wanted to kind of just be free. And so obviously you don't know how that's going to go. I'm generally quite a serious professional player. I'm like, this could be a nightmare. This could be totally the wrong mood for me. But then from there, we go to the court. I do my normal pre-match routine. I'm still feeling kind of loose and a bit like, free in my warm-up, even when I'm at the court. And I'm pretty sure I definitely had more lightness to my warm-up and was feeling pretty good. Went on the court, had an absolute battle with Raneem, and probably had no right to win, but managed to get over the line and win. I think, in 5, I think I might have saved a match ball or was down in the 4th, and came off. And from that point on, I guess that's where belief goes, is that I realized maybe that the mindset that I had been in before maybe wasn't the right way for me to approach matches. Maybe there was a different way to approach matches, a softness, a playfulness, a less serious Laura that could step on the court and then be serious Laura. Like, there was nothing about me when I stepped on the court that wanted to dance. I wanted to kill Raneem and win that match. And so you would never have noticed a difference. But what it did, I think, was create a freedom and a softening within me that allowed me to step on the court and then go after what I wanted, if I'm making sense there.
Oh, absolute. Like, the way you link a story in and bring it to life is massively inspiring. There's probably like 8 rabbit holes I could go down with this. So let me try and kind of pick where I want to go. So first thing that comes to mind, when you did that, did you then exhibit any more of that playfulness in future preparations then? What happened there?
Yeah, well, of course. So then the belief changes, doesn't it? The belief changes that Laura, serious player, professional, game plan has to be executed, needs to prepare properly and be serious before the match, then changes to, Laura can be, I can be, don't want to talk about myself in the third person, but I can be playful, giddy, excited, happy, even when I'm a bit nervous. And it tended to happen more in semi-finals and finals going forward, because that's when the lightness really is there. Let's be honest. I'm not just saying, like, guys, you can fake this in the first round when you've got the weight of the world in pressure on you. Of course, like, you're not going to feel like playing Emily Whitlock first round, like dancing, because you're free as a bird and it doesn't matter if you lose. But there's something when you go into a final or a semi-final playing the best in the world that's you have to accept. You could play the best that you could and still lose. So the best chance you've got is to play well. How are you going to play well? And that's a big thing. Like, how do you start to learn and understand how you perform at your best? And so that day I realized maybe there was a chance that I could play well if I felt happy and felt good and felt like dancing. And that's not something you can fake. You can't just decide to start dancing in your warm up, and because it doesn't feel good if you don't feel like doing it. So it's more, it wasn't necessarily the dancing, it was more the mindset that I felt like I had to be in to be able to dance and do, I don't even call it dancing. It was like a bum wiggle half the time, just shimmying across to my bag or whatever, and get a song on, and it'd just be the song of the moment or a song that I quite like listening to at the time, and that was it. So yeah, in answer to your question, I then learned going forward that there was a different way to approach my seriousness.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing stuff there, and I love it. So we also want to explore, and it was maybe linked to my next question, maybe a two-part here, the idea about self-belief, and you've touched on that's changed, but also looking at, and again, this is what I've maybe started to explore with a couple of people I'm working with, is almost this level of you want to be the best in the world and you want to be the best person you want to be. And someone in particular I'm working with is talking about they're always working on their weaknesses, and they're putting such an emphasis on going, I need to be better, so I need to work on my weaknesses. And along the way, they're not celebrating any of the small wins, even the smallest little things, not giving them any recognition. And I'm trying to reframe that a little bit, talking about, yes, we need to work on your weaknesses and improve those because they'll give you the big jumps, but winning is a habit, and we need to maybe cultivate this mindset of actually, let's recognize some of those small wins along the way. So can you expand on that? The idea of does it link to the softening of the mental approach? Do you give yourself credit for some of those small wins? And how does that link to self-belief as well? I know there's a lot of things to pack in there.
What do you mean by small wins? Like little things that you do in training that are successful?
Yeah, this is a little bit linked more to the match. So for example, the player's playing someone who would always beat them, but they'll get 7 or 8 points a game, but they'll be more frustrated that they didn't win the game and be like, oh, well, I'm training hard. I need to see results and success in winning the game. So I'm trying to get to going, actually, 7 or 8 points against someone who's above your level. Let's actually recognize that that's a small little win. I'm not expecting them to jump out of bed and punch the air and be like, amazing, I'm on top of the world. But cultivating the mindset of going, there's little things along the way, little signposts. It could be training, but I'm just focusing more on the match play at the moment. Does that make sense then?
Yeah, I think I think the one thing to think about during actual match play is thinking about how the technical stuff that you're working in is coming through in matches. I always remember DP saying to me when I was working on something, he was always a little bit worried about working technically too close to matches, but he always used the example of Peter Nicol changing something quite big technically in his game, and DP saying, oh, you know, I'm not really sure we should be messing around with this. It's like a week and a half before the British Open, and Pete Nicol was like, no, I need something to go with. I need something to focus on. And so it depends on the person hugely. And I was always relatively happy to work on stuff technically, but then appreciated that when I stepped on the match court, that needed to be boxed off, forgotten about, and parked over there. And the one thing that I think I was quite good at maybe was working on something technically or a change, whatever it is, in a match. And that could be a mental change. Worked a lot on my thought processes between rallies and things like that. And that can help. So, but you have to practice that in practice as well, because people will say, like, you know, oh, if you want to change how you're thinking on the court, then I just have to change how I'm thinking on the court. And you have to practice that the same way you practice a forehand drop shot. So when you practice matches, are you practicing your mentality? And that's where I think I said in part one, I was quite a good league player. I was quite a good practice match player. There's a lot of players that had never beaten me in the practice match because I was always practicing, you know, mindset of actual match mentality. So I would always practice the technical stuff, getting back to your question, where I would be on court, practice the technical work, solo it, practice it with Danny, practice it with DP, practice, and then park it. Right. And then I would look for one chance that happened when I was in the match court. I would be looking for one time where I opened my racket face better, or extended my fingers on the forehand drop, or reached for the ball, or threw my leg further, or volleyed a ball that I wouldn't have done before. And it's just one at first, because that's as slow as change happens. And then you come off the court and Danny will say, I saw it. Did you see it? And maybe he saw more than what I was seeing, because sometimes I think it happened and it didn't, or vice versa. And then the next time you go on, you know, you've done it then. So I've got to do it again. I've got to do it 2 times, 3 times. And then it starts to become more natural. So I think that when you talk about getting the small wins, the winning and the losing of the rally when you're working on something technical becomes, you know, if you can get that in your game, there's a chance you might win or beat that player or play better in the future. But you have to recognize that it's seeping in slowly. There's one time you do it, then there's 2, then there's 5, then there's 15, and then you're just doing it. And that's where you have to trust in the process of the practice. But mainly you have to notice the one time first and give yourself credit for that.
Yeah, that's really sound advice. And again, linking to the softening, did you possibly not recognize those wins at one point? And were you always looking at what I need to improve better in my weaknesses? Or were you always quite good at going, actually, I've done well there, I've worked on something and done it? So can you talk on that, about how you started to cultivate those small wins in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, early on in my career, like I touched upon before, there was a really big element of me being able to do things in practice and setting a level, and then not being able to get it out on the match court at all because of the nerves and the expectation. And I think that softening that comes with it, that lack of seriousness and the playfulness that comes with that I just spoke about, is one way that you can start to try to get some of that stuff into your match play. I mean, there comes a time, and there was so many matches where I would have sat down after a match and just been really disappointed with how I'd played, and not necessarily because I've won or I've lost, but because of not getting my best level out. And so it's getting out of your own way mentally. It's all well and good doing all of the training and all of the preparation if you're just going to put barriers up in your way to actually stop you getting that level out when you're on the match court. It's easy for me to say that for me came from a little bit of softening off and a little bit of lack of seriousness. And that was because that was my default. But for somebody else, that might be being more serious. You know, it might be being more, you know, playful or free. I mean, people are so different, aren't they? Like Sarah Jane Perry, for example, can, you know, before she plays a match, she will be stood next to me chatting away. I mean, I turned up in Hong Kong one year. I was going to coach her between games. She was playing Tesney. turn up 5 minutes before she's going to go on. I'm obviously, if it was me, I'd have headphones on, I'd be on a back court, I'd have my face on that said, don't talk to me because I'm in the zone or you're going to get punched. I'm like sat down, waiting to watch her play. And she goes, "You're right. What are you doing? What have you been up to?" I'm like, what? But I now know from playing so many matches with her for England that that's what she needs. She's not a massive warm-up. She does what she needs for her to perform at her best. And she also knows that the type of mindset she needs to be in. And she probably, I'm assuming, I've never spoke to her about it, we just have a laugh that we're very different, that she needs a bit of relaxation. She needs maybe a little bit of distraction. She needs calming down, something to take her mind off it. Who knows? But it is a very, very different approach. And having played with her enough times for England now, you know that you can you make yourself available for someone like that. So you go and just have a little mooch around the players area before she's going to play, and then you're there if she wants to talk, and if she doesn't, then she doesn't. But it's knowing yourself, I think, and then letting you people around you know that as well.
Yeah, you're talking exactly my language here. And just maybe one more point on this, because that's going to link me really nicely into my next thing I want to talk about. You as a coach now, and, coming from obviously your amazing playing background, career, maybe the most natural thing is to go, hey, this worked for me, so I'm gonna let you as the player know about this. How have you maybe molded and flexed your coaching style to be able to accommodate your players? Can you think of any examples or how that's worked?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, you have to probably get to know and understand the players that you're working with massively, because you're absolutely right. Default was always, are you taking this seriously enough? Have you had a nap? Have you eaten right? Have you done this? Have you prepared? Have you done some video analysis? Have you written your goals down? Have you It's just, that would be my mindset. And obviously thinking back to the SJ example is one way to understand that not everybody is different. So when I've taken that into my coaching, the people that I'm working with generally are quite similar to me, because they generally, you seek out like-minded people a lot of the time. Right. However, DP was not like me at all. So that flaws that theory. But the people that I'm working with are I think you have to be anyway, but they're quite professional. They want to, talk a lot. There's always a lot of tactics that go on. And I think that's fair to understand that side of it. And I can bring in a lot of my character and my understanding of the game through, the players that I've played, which is a huge advantage. But then I've got to, as a coach, listen to what the player's saying to me and make suggestions, and then maybe later follow up on whether those suggestions were actually done. Because I think if you make a suggestion to somebody that they should, rest in their room and get a tactical plan together, and then they go out for a walk and get a coffee and chill, probably it's not, I have to understand as a coach that that's not them being unprofessional. That's them doing what they need to do to stay relaxed. And sitting in a room getting tangled up about match preparation is potentially not what they want to do. So yeah, understanding the player and a conversation with that can help as well. How do you think that you best get your best performances out on court? How do you think you get your best? How do you think you prepare the best? And then that not only helps you understand the player, but it helps the player think about that themselves, because maybe a lot of people don't actually know. And that's where a lot of conversation can come in. A lot of conversation can then unlock a lot of issues, can't it?
Sure. And it sounds like there as well, you suggesting the player goes in their room and match preparation visualizes, but they go out for their coffee and walk around. And you got to obviously deem that that's not being unprofessional. But it sounds like you've got to let the athlete explore different ways as well, and actually almost accidentally come up with things as well. Yes, you as a coach can maybe present things, but actually a part of it is the athlete walking through those doors themselves and discovering it along the way.
I mean, I can't sit here and say to someone, you'll perform well if you dance before your match, because
I'm sure there's
I,
something there, Laura. Come on, you
I
can
personally
trademark
didn't even know it myself, though. 2016,
that.
we're talking. I mean, that's a long time into my career. That's,
Mm,
I turned pro in 2001. It was 2016 before I figured that out. So, yes, you have to make mistakes. You have to do it. Danny and I had a fun, we were talking about it before about superstitions and where they come from and how strange they are, because generally it's some stupid thought process that goes, if I win this game, I promise I'll never drink coffee before my match again. And then you win the game and you're like, wow, I'm not going to drink coffee again because it worked. And then it's stuck with you and it's the most ridiculous thing ever. And that dancing thing, who knows whether that was going to work? It's a leap of faith at the time, whether you actually have to go for it. And there's a fine line. You say to a player, go to your room, do this, or quite often they'll ask me, I get, obviously, because I've been there, they go, what did you do? What should I do? And I make suggestions, and then they'll see how I felt quite nervous. I felt like pent up. So then we suggest, okay, go out for a walk. And then you find out that they did 3 miles around Edinburgh Castle. And you go, when we said a walk, we were maybe thinking, out for lunch, maybe a little shop and sit on a bench and get back. So you figure it out by talking about it, I think. And that's the most important thing.
yeah, well, this then links me exactly to where I think we want to take a bit of a deep dive in regard to personalities and getting to know yourself. And the more I'm going down this route with players and having these conversations with yourself and others, it's just so evident that success comes from the real deep knowing of yourself. So we talked in part 1 about Enneagram, and we almost probably didn't give it enough attention to detail. So are you keen to take a deep dive into Enneagram? Because a few people have asked me about it since they've heard as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's an amazing tool.
Okay, let's explore it. When did you do it? How did you do it? Recommendations for people, because on my personal level, I want to explore it as well. So I'm here as a student at the same time.
Yeah, so I guess the Enneagram was first introduced to me when I said in part 1 about doing the NLP course, and NLP in general is something that would probably link in quite well. So the guy that I was working with and doing a lot of the NLP, and I did the NLP course that I mentioned in part 1, where I was starting to become aware of how everybody's mind is different, and not just that, but how you can maybe shape your mind and improve your mind and make it stronger and start to understand yourself. And I do believe, they say, don't they, that knowledge is a weapon, sort of thing, and the more you know, the more you know, the better you are. So I think that becomes the same for your personality as well. And so rather than just thinking that you know who you are and making mistakes, I know I get angry when I do that and did it, but the Enneagram I found was just hugely insightful, because it started to make me realize the reason behind the behaviors, really. And that's what's really interesting. So there's 9 spaces on the Enneagram that are labeled 1 to 9, and I think they all have words attached to them that kind of, I think number 9, I don't know that, obviously a lot of the other numbers I'm not that good on because they're not me, so I've not really read about them. There's also certain numbers that are certainly more inclined for sport, not always, but there's the number 3, for example. There's a lot of 3s you'd imagine they're very achievement based, very kind of driven to what that, and I think that's where I'm a number 1, and the number 1 is all about kind of trying to do things right and do things the right way. And so it's very hard to differentiate unless you know the reason behind. So you'll see someone and you'll go, they're driven towards achievement, they always want to win, they're very purposeful, they've got to be a number 3. And it's very hard if you don't know the reason behind that behavior as to why they're trying to win. Are they trying to win to create peace in the household or peace within themselves? Then that means they could be a number 9.
I see.
Then if you're trying to win because that's the right thing to do, training because it's the right thing to do, then you could be a number 1. And that's where the numbers, people can look the same because the behavior on the surface can look the same, but the reason behind the behavior is very different.
That's deep.
So,
That's very deep. It's okay.
so as a number 1, I started to realize that all of my behavior was to do things the right way. And so I guess that's where it links in with me personally, like do it the right way, get the reward, because and there's, for anyone who is a number one, this will really resonate, but it was, you feel like you've got a little judge on your shoulder all the time that's judging you. And so therefore you can also become quite judgmental of others, more so than a lot of other numbers. So sometimes I've heard, just from like working with the trainer that I did, Peter, I think it's the number 6 that will say, I feel like I've got a committee. So I've got like 10 people on my shoulders and they all chip in and they all voice and they're all giving me opinions. And I just got one person sitting there that feels like they're judging me. And then therefore I can judge others. And what's brilliant about the wisdom of the Enneagram, which is the book that I love the most, you can go healthy up the levels as well. So a really unhealthy one is kind of very judgmental, very aggressive, snaps quite easily. And then you can go up the levels of health. And that's also quite hard because you can get 2 number ones, one who's very, very healthy and one who's very, very unhealthy. And the unhealthy one can look more like an 8 whose personality is very aggressive. And like, I think the players that are an 8 would stick out like a sore thumb. They say silly things. They're from the gut. They don't necessarily like think about what they're saying before they say it. They can be very aggressive. Sometimes you're just cringing because they say, and obviously you would know from watching me on court that I'm not an 8 because I'm very controlled and I'm very thoughtful with what I say and what I think.
Oh wow, we are going to take loads of rabbit holes down this one. So how did you start your journey? What age were you at? Why did you go into I know you said the NLP, but can you talk us about the age and then how you began the journey? Was it online? Was it reading books?
Yeah, so I'd say I probably got into it about maybe 24-ish, I'd say. Really started to really understand some of the, dipping my toe more and more into the mental side. And I think in part 1, I obviously said I'd always been interested in that and always understood that the mental side was something that I wanted to work on, reading Steve Backley's book and working with Danny, starting really low level on affirmations. I'd have stickers on my mirror where, it'd be like, today's going to be a great day. And
you're great.
Just yeah, I mean, but at the time, that's how you start with stuff. You start really low level and now I think, gosh, I'm affirmations, but they can help in their own way. They can flip you from a negative to a positive state, and short term, not a bad thing. So the Enneagram was because the guy that I was working with, Peter, was on the board of Enneagram, I think globally, like basically one of the very few experts in it. And we just used to do all of my mental sessions with him to start were all around the Enneagram. And I would say to him sometimes, are you sure I'm a 1? Because, I've been reading and I think this. And he was like, you are the biggest 1 I've ever met. Wow, okay. I'm like, okay, so I'm a number 1.
I'll trust you on that. Well, that was going to lead me into my next bit, and we'll keep going with this line of conversation. Like, how staunchly do you stay within that number? Does it flex in different situations, a work environment, professional environment, home environment? Because I'm a little bit more aware of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and I like parts of it, but it's also part of it feels a bit like a horoscope, and you can make it fit into any situation you want. So where are you on that in regard to how staunchly you entrench in that number 1 position?
Well, I think firstly, the thing to say as well is, as with all personality typing, you can either see it as a boxing in process or of an expanding out process. And with 9 Enneagram personality type spaces, you're obviously going to have maybe an instinct to go, well, I don't want to be boxed into one of 9 numbers. This is rubbish. But like I said, if you can really start to think of it as a way to understand why you behave the way that you do, and then just leave it there, that there isn't a need to take this too seriously. There isn't a need to go, the Enneagram has the answer to everything. It doesn't. It is a very simple tool to help you understand yourself and why you behave the way you do in certain situations. So I've just opened the book, actually, strangely, and it's the 9 passions. So the passion of each space. So obviously number 1, anger. And that's it. When I am, you know, in a bad place, or, you know, feeling, I get angry, and I get pent up as well, very pent up. You go to a number 7 and it's gluttony. So
Wow.
you just, and if you're a 7, you'll know that. And number 3 is deceitful. And when you know someone's a 3, it's not deceit, it's not nasty lies. They're little white lies, because they're an achiever and because they'll just put a little positive spin on it. Whereas that's not me. That's like number 1s, they do the right thing, and the right thing generally, obviously we all tell white lies, but you know, we try not to lie, really. So it's things like that. And yes, in answer to your question, the space of the Enneagram is kind of the shape of a circle, and it's all linking across. So maybe it tells you which the circle has all of the numbers around it, and there's lines going across it like a star, and it tells you which other spaces you're prone to go into. So for a number 1, for example, my space when I generally am in a bad place can go to a number 4, and a number 4 can be quite negative, quite sort of down, can get quite down on themselves quite quickly.
Critical of yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and a bit and moody as well, you know, really, really quite moody. Don't necessarily feel like you don't feel like I don't feel like the true self, because I'm not being my true oneness. And then I'd need to read a bit more about the 4 to refresh my memory. But then when I'm in a good place, I go to a 7. And I know, funny how I know that one a bit better, but that would be the dancing side of me that we just talked about. It would be the playful side. It would be the adventure. 7s are generally quite adventurous. They're always people who, my brother's a 7 actually, and it's strange that he's ended up leaving Lancashire and going to America. He always was like, traveled more than me, came to watch me in the Commonwealth Games in Delhi, and just went round India with his friend, been to Ghana doing charity work. Just generally that 7, they're like free flowing. And the minute they get boxed in with a bit too much commitment, they're either going to be kind of negative about that, or, you know, get quite stressed with it, or do something to break out of getting themselves into that situation. And I think that when I'm at my best, I become a bit more like a playful 7.
Okay.
But generally you sit in your number and you go to another number, but you always, so for a 4, like the number 1 would have a good side and a bad side, and the 4 has a good side and a bad side. So when I'm in a bad place, I edge to the 4, but the bad side of a 4. And when I'm in a good place, I go to a 7, but I go to the good place of a 7. So I don't necessarily get the bad side. That's how I understand it anyway. And it's just brilliant.
It is. It sounds flipping awesome. I'm going to be diving into this. And a couple of things that come from what you said there. Firstly, you're holding a mirror up to yourself massively, of course. You know, you really look at yourself and how you maybe flex along certain situations, but you maybe just touched on it. You can almost turn this outwards, and you can look at other people and understand other people, how they operate and how they deal with things as well. And has that been a process of looking internally and at other people with it?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely, and like I said, it's hard to really know what someone's number is, but we spent a fair bit of time when I was trying to chase Nicole, really watching videos of her and trying to figure out when she was under stress, the behaviors and what number it could edge towards. I don't want to obviously go into too much detail, but we looked at that a lot. And then we also tried to look at it from a mental point of view of how I could play that to my advantage a little bit, and the place that, you know, maybe she was in mentally when she was playing her best, and maybe where she needed to be taken out, how she needed to be taken out of that.
That's brilliant.
And get her to a point where, and Peter really helped me with that, because he helped me understand myself. And of course, when you know that about yourself, so for example, if someone, you know, they wouldn't obviously know it from an Enneagram perspective, but say generally with anger, I didn't generally play that well when I was angry. Sometimes I did, but I'd always get told off with like, you've gone walkabout for 3 rallies, and I generally see red and get the rage. So I understood that I needed to keep myself quite calm. And it's a funny story actually, because And I realized one time I came off court, started ranting at Danny. I know what I'm doing now. I've got it. I've just got to do this. I've got to do that. And just give me my drink. Go back on court, lose the game 11-2. Like that literally happened every single time. So I
Wow.
learned over time that I needed to be quite calm to play my best. So even when I had the urge to come off and go, I've got it now. I'm playing well. I know what I'm doing tactically. I've got it. I'd go sit down, get your drink and put it in your mouth so you can't talk and just
Pacifier.
breathe. Yeah, exactly. Just breathe. And so it's also understanding, don't let someone else do that to you either. So you start to understand if someone's going to rile you up and get you angry, there's a certain type of anger. There's an anger with determination, but then there's an anger of distraction, isn't there?
Mm.
An anger with distraction is a nightmare for me.
Mm. So you did this at 25, and then you obviously formed a lot of your psychology sessions based around it.
Yeah.
Have you revisited it now as a coach? And do you think it might actually be slightly different, or would it reinforce the same thing? Where are you at in that? Because, 10 years later or so, it could be quite interesting. We're all very different people, aren't we? 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I generally don't move. I'm still, if anything, I think you'd probably agree, you get more rooted into your personality as you get older. And quite often, a lot of the youngsters that you work with don't have a lot of mental baggage, mental issues. The older you work with, the more mental baggage they've got. You start thinking about your childhood, how your parents ruined your life. I talked about the hypnosis. That was all about, my dad, poor guy, probably didn't do anything, but it just compounds over time. Everyone's got issues. Everyone's got people they lost to. Everyone's got people they're jealous of. Everyone's had work, family issues that have popped up that have just been pushed down, pushed under a rug. And so I generally find that if anything else, you generally can get a little, unless you're aware of your personality, you get almost a little bit more unhealthy the older you get. And that's why people start going to therapy when they're older, isn't it? And talking about it. So with this stuff, it's really hard sometimes to talk about this with a youngster because they haven't actually really fully even settled into their own person. They don't understand themselves fully. This can actually help start that process. And then in terms of from a coaching perspective, you have to also know the player you're working with and whether or not something like this is going to be a bit too heavy for them. Some are really into it. So the great thing about the Wisdom of the Enneagram book is every chapter, the way that you find out your space, typically, there's three paragraphs at the start of the book, A, B, and C. And you read 3 and you pick a letter, and then you read X, Y, and Z and you pick a letter. And then depending on the matchup, it suggests possible numbers for you. Cool. Then you go to the chapter, and at the start of every chapter, you've got questions that you then rate 1 to 5. And if you get a certain score, then you're generally that number. And if there's a couple of numbers that are quite high, then you have to read the chapter and try and figure it out. So for a 1, me, most people see me as a serious, no-nonsense person. And when all said and done, I suppose I am 5. Okay. And actually, it's funny because you start laughing. You go, I always try to be honest and objective about myself, and I'm determined to follow through on my conscience no matter what the cost. 5. There we go. So already you're like, but for you, if you're not a 1, then that's going to be like, I guess people don't see you as serious, Jesse. So that's going to be like a 2, isn't it? A 1 or a 2, probably.
Yeah, I think
so. That's where your numbers add up, and then you read it, and then within the number 1 type of personality, there's different instincts. So even within the 1, you've got 3 different instincts. You've got the self-preservation instinct, you've got the social instinct, and you've got the sexual instinct. And that itself is a very different look for a number 1. It's how you present yourself to the world. So again, this is where it's really tough with younger athletes, because they might not actually know that, but this might help them start. And then there's also people who you're working with who maybe this is just a bit too deep and they don't want to shine a light on that yet. So you have to know it's how you present it. As you can tell, I'm quite excited, quite passionate. I know how much this has helped me. I know it's not the be all and end all as well, but I have to be careful that I don't try and force it on people if they're not interested.
You made 2 really big points there that I was going to pick up on. Yes, I think we've got to remember it's a model and it's maybe a suggestion and it highlights things, but I get really into these type of things and sometimes they can overtake a lot of what I'm doing. And I've just really, I'm not religious at all, but it almost becomes religious. I'm like, I'm following
Yeah,
that
it
thing
becomes
so deeply.
fundamental, doesn't it?
Mm. And then secondly, like you said, it's not about forcing your ways on others, and knowing, because that was my question was, how many people have you introduced this to, and are they your younger athletes, your older athletes, and how do you go about opening that door? So you can maybe answer that question. And how many people have you tried to expose it to that you are coaching?
I try to expose it to people who I feel are kind of looking for answers. And that's a vibe that you get, isn't it, as a coach and as a person? And particularly if you've got people staying at your house and the conversation delves a little bit deeper outside of squash, or they make certain comments, or the squash isn't going well and it could be because of a mental thing. Because let's be honest, this is the mental side is just one part. You can be as mentally strong as you want. If you're not fit, it doesn't matter how mentally strong you are, but the same, you can be really fit, and if you're not mentally strong, then that's tough too. So
Mm.
it's one part of a big jigsaw, the mental side in general, and then you narrow right down to the Enneagram. So if someone's struggling, particularly with, like I spoke about before, the softening off, the getting off out of your own way, the understanding your personality. Why can't I perform as well on court as I can off the court? What are the reasons behind that? It's not as simple as nerves, because
Mm.
then this is where it's the rabbit hole, because you go, well, why are you nervous? They go, well, I'm just nervous because I want to win. But why do you want to win? Well, I want to win because then that makes me feel good. But why do you want to feel good? Because you win a squash match. Well, because then I might prove that I'm a good person. Oh,
Mm.
right. So if
Wow.
you win a squash match, you're a good person. So what happens if you don't win a squash match? You're not a good person. No,
Mm.
no. Well, I don't mean that. I just mean, well, make my mum and dad happy. I'm like, right. So it's important that your mum and dad are happy. And so you win a squat. So you dive, you deep, 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 deep. And you're not nervous because you want to win the squash match. You're nervous because you think you're not a good person, or your mum and dad don't love you if you don't win. That is a heck of a big issue to deal with. And that's where something like this, and working with a psychologist, I think, or a hypnotherapist, like we talked about in part one, is it's like next level stuff when it comes to understanding yourself. Because generally it isn't about winning or losing a squash match. It's about what that means to you as a person. And that's where the Enneagram comes in and links in, because it's who you are as a person.
Mm. So it sounds like you're really touching into like your core beliefs and really are getting down and to those bits. And listen, I think you've highlighted an amazing thing on that Enneagram, and anyone who's listening can really take some huge bits of that. And would you say the book is a good place to start? What's the book called?
Yeah, definitely. The Wisdom of the Enneagram. It's a thick, heavy book, but you only need to read the beginning of it and then your chapter, maybe,
Yeah.
flick through a few chapters. So unless, like you said, as a coaching tool, you're actually using it to work with players. And for me, understanding a player's space, Enneagram space, is
Mm.
really helpful in how you actually coach them too. Because for me, I'm a lot about doing the right thing. But if that's not going to tick someone's boxes, if they're not bothered about that, for them, it might be about helping someone. Like a number two is all about giving and helping. So if I'm constantly telling and never allowing them to give me anything as a number two, they're never going to feel good, and never. So you have to work with the space as a coach and try and figure out how you can get them to perform at their best, working within their space. So it's helpful as a coach to understand their personality. So yeah, like I'd go with The Wisdom of the Enneagram.
Mhm.
It's by Richard Riso and Russ Hudson. Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson.
Perfect. Great recommendation. And I'm going to be jumping onto that. I know a few people particularly come to mind that were actually really interested for this chat. So thanks for sharing. And I'm not sure if you want to go down this rabbit hole a little bit, entirely up to you, but we touched on hypnosis in the first session. You mentioned it a couple of times here. How are you feeling about like discussing that side of things?
Yeah, yeah, totally fine. I mean,
Okay.
it's just that, yeah, another great tool, and a bit wacky too, isn't it? To be honest,
Yeah.
but I think,
So
like
yeah,
I
tell us your journey on hypnosis.
Yeah, I think, like I said in part one, there was a big part of it that I don't think I actually probably believed sometimes, that I was actually under. And when you think of hypnosis, you think of the comedy shows, don't you, or something?
Yeah.
Go, look into my eyes, not around the eyes, and it's not like that. And actually, funnily enough, my brother in law actually had hypnosis to help him quit smoking as well, and that he said exactly the same. But it helped. He's never smoked since. So it's a massive tool, if you can look at it like that, to maybe unlock a few things. And like I said, probably we're looking for hypnosis when you've got an issue. You've got an issue that you want to work through. It's not something that a young 19-year-old is going to go into and just talk like you would to a psychologist and say, I just want to be a better squash player. It's about working through some issues. And for me, a lot of those issues were certainly, and it was the same working with Peter, were a lot about working through my childhood. And when I say about the delving deeper, I don't mind saying at all that I wanted to win a squash match, because I think we basically got it down to, like, when you talk about core belief, I wanted to make my family proud. I wanted to feel like I was doing the best that I could. I wanted to feel like I wasn't a failure, that my dad was happy with me, that winning squash matches made my dad happy particularly. And a lot of that is working through those issues. And why have you got such a big issue with your dad and pleasing your dad when you're mid-20s now? You're an adult, you've moved out, married. Why do you still have this issue with wanting to make sure that you're pleasing your dad? So it's working through that. So yeah, you sit in the room with the guy and you talk about all this, and he'll say, what are you trying to do? And for me, a lot of it would always just be, I'm not playing as well on the squash court as I want to be. That was, the surface stuff was, I've got more in me than I want to, than I'm getting out. And then we would talk and touch upon something, and he would hear me say something and go, right, yeah, okay, got it now. And then you'd sit back, get your feet out, put your arm on a couch, and it's kind of supposedly put you under. But I always felt like I was there. I was always there mentally. And then you never say a word. And this is the freaky thing about the hypnosis. And this is the thing that got me to believe in, because even though I was still there, he talked to you and he would ask you a question and you answered by moving one of your fingers. And sometimes my finger moved when I didn't know it was going to.
Wow.
And that's what was a bit freaky, a bit weird. And so I was almost, and it's a really good skill as well to sort of learn to get out of your own way, because the more you thought, the less it worked. You had to try and blank your mind and empty your mind and just let your hand rest. And then that was when the weird stuff happened, like the subconscious was talking for you.
Yeah.
And your finger would move and that would be a yes and that one would be a no. And he'd go, right, so you're saying no, and I'm going, am I?
Wow, that is, like you said, quite wacky. And so it just, I don't know, two things that came to mind there was, there's a little bit of meditation, mindfulness, there's a little bit of visualization in there as well, possibly. And yeah, it's such a curious part, and I've never really looked into it. But it sounds like these were difficult sessions. It sounds like you had to really address some core things, growing up, and some really tough times with your father. And I think you did mention previously, not necessarily on this show, but when we talked about having to really impress your father and feeling like he's driving you back from tournaments, and the conversation in the car was difficult. Are you happy to expand on that and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, dad was just, he had high standards and wanted me to do as well as I could, and he wanted it to be worthwhile giving up his time. So when I went into the hypnosis, a lot of the stuff, I think generally the hypnosis is, you've got an issue as a child that manifests itself and then sort of grows and gets bigger over time. And so pretty much the majority of the sessions that I had were always going back to my childhood. So you would say something, he would pick up on something, you would go back, he puts you under, and then he goes, firstly asks you the question of, what were you below the age of 20 when this happened? And your fingers would move. And, sometimes I'm pretty sure I was moving my fingers. Sometimes I'm also freaked out about the fact that I didn't. And then they go, were you younger than 10? Were you younger than 5? And I'm like, my finger's going, yeah. And I'm like, I can't remember when I'm 5. And then he goes, right, so you've got a memory now from when you were, you were below the age of 5. You've got a memory. What's that first memory that pops in your head? When you're ready, open your eyes and tell me. And I literally burst into tears and go, I remember my dad leaving me at the pond when we were feeding the ducks when I was 4. And I've literally got, I don't even remember this memory. And I don't even know to this day if it was really true. But it was like this whole issue about working through feeling like dad was going to leave me if I wasn't doing what, the right thing, or there's the Enneagram again, the right thing, winning squash matches, and I'm literally bawling my eyes out over something that I don't actually know is true. But that's the whole thing with the mental side. Does it matter if it's true? If you work through it and come through the other side and actually go, wow, I feel like I've been hit for a bus by a day and a half. And then this lightness comes, this mental shift, this cloud lifts, and I go, we've worked through it and talked through it. And, he's gone, how do you think that your dad felt about that? And do you think that he actually did do that? And I rang my dad up and said to him, when we went to we used to feed the ducks, right? When I was young, we'd let mum have a lay in on a Sunday, and he'd go, yeah. I go, did you ever, I've got this memory, it's popped up. I think I dreamt it. I didn't want to tell him. I hope he's not listening to this. I said, I had this dream that maybe you, like at one time you left me and I couldn't see you for a while. He was like, never happened. No. He said, the only thing that might have happened is that, at some point I was, you couldn't see me for the trees because obviously you were little, but you were always in my sight, but sometimes maybe you weren't in mine. And so this whole memory that I'd basically built up became about this young Laura who probably couldn't see her dad feeling completely abandoned, when actually that wasn't the way the story panned out. And then being able to heal that and then going, oh, dad didn't leave me, and how that then has manifested for 20 years.
Wow. This is deep, eh? Wow, this is. Thank you for sharing. By the way, I know you may be revisiting some quite difficult stuff, and yeah, geez, the hypnosis is, yeah. Anyone who's keen to look at it could go explore it a bit. I want to bring it back a little bit into maybe something more specific. Visualizations. We didn't actually get much into talking visualizations in part one, and firstly, do you practice visualizations, and what form did this take when you were preparing for your matches and entering into it? So could you expand on that?
Yeah, I think visualization wasn't something that I would probably say massively did. I was obviously aware of it, and I actually probably did a spell on trying to work on my concentration, which I guess is visualization. I read a book, can't remember which book it was, that talked about, can you look at a pencil and not think about anything for a minute? Can you then make that 3 minutes? Can you then make that 5 minutes? And I guess that sort of started to make me aware of concentration and power of concentration and the thoughts that come in. So I did a little bit of that while I was younger, trying to work on, emptying my mind and keeping it empty. Mm-hmm. And then I think a lot of my visualization in actual fact was done thinking about my technique, thinking about my work. It wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say I never did visualization, because I think I did, but I don't think that I actually sat down and visualized, because for me, it always felt a little bit fake at times, because I felt like I was visualizing a situation that potentially could never really happen. Mm-hmm. And it also, a bit like the affirmations, it always felt like I was forcing a positive that was never going to happen. Mm-hmm. So when visualizing, for example, a match where I'm just supposed to be playing brilliantly every rally, that's not realistic at all. That's not realistic for every shot to go where I want it to go, and then them never to hit a winner, and for me never to lose a rally. So then I'd be like, right, well, so they've got to win the odd rally, right? And then that didn't seem to be visualizing them winning a rally. So I didn't sit down and visualize from that manner, if that makes sense. But I definitely did visualize in terms of technical work. I feel like I play a lot of images in my head. So if DP said to me, this is what I want you to do with your swing, thinking about it in the car on the drive home, obviously I'm not visualizing because I'm driving, but I would just think about it and feel it, and quite often have a racket in my hand and practice it and really get into the feelings of those things. And then I guess the other thing to link in with visualization would be some of the NLP processes I did, where we did a an organic belief change process, which was massive for my career, about a belief change. And that's a lot about visualization, about, why do you not believe? What does it look like when you do believe? Did an injury, I think it was actually a phobia cure process that we switched to be an injury. Coming back from an injury, I was done my ankle and was really struggling to throw my leg into the front corner because of the injury in the ankle. And we did a lot of visualization, but sat in an NLP process where you see yourself on a movie screen and you play that backwards and then you play it forwards and then you do it in black and white and color and and that was visualization of this. You see it going slow-mo backwards, then you play it in color, then you play it forwards in slow-mo, and then you play it forwards in full speed. Then all of a sudden you go on court and something's shifted in your mind where you then you've seen yourself doing it, so you can then do it. And that massively helped from an injury perspective, being able to go on court.
That's really interesting. And listen, when you say visualization and we talk about it, it didn't hit the mark for you. Completely fine. I get it. Some people will go and they'll really hit the mark and something will happen. And you, again, just reinforcing that idea about yourself. But the one thing that I want to pick up there, and this is where I've started to go through this process of discovery with visualization a bit more, is, painting these perfect pictures is so fragile. It's brittle, it's fragile, because it's gonna break. It's unlikely a game of squash is going to be like that. So the whole big idea that I'm trying to do some work on now is this idea of negative visualization. You visualize the worst case scenario, you go there, you visit it, but then you replace it with the solution and you try go and find the solution. And yes, it's still not the real thing. It's still, predicting the future. But I think there's a lot of evidence and studies starting to go big into this idea of negative visualization, and that seems a little bit more powerful and more relevant for squash, I think.
Yeah. And I think that would have made a lot more sense for me. Like when I was watching some skiing, I feel like they're unbelievable at visualizing. And for a sport like that, where they maybe get a couple of runs at a ski race and you're going so fast and round slaloms and all that sort of stuff, then of course you need to have that visualization. You see them, don't you, on the start line, like doing it in their head, and their bodies are moving with it. Of course, I absolutely agree that for a closed sport where it's get from point A to point B, absolutely amazing. And I'm sure you'd be rare to find anyone who doesn't do visualization. But yeah, from a squash perspective, I guess I've been trying to say to people, look, if you are going to do the visualization and you do enjoy it and you feel like it's really good for you, I'm not going to have a go at that. I've given probably 10 or 15 things that are a bit wacky and weird that wouldn't be for everybody. But try to think of it as like, how can you get this technical change in? So if you're going to do your visualization and you're struggling with getting a technical change in, visualize it over and over again and see yourself repeating that swing change or that movement change, and use it from that matter of fact, when that is a closed effort of swinging from point A to point B, get it done. And then, from that negative point of view, I would definitely be a bit more up for that, like a realistic version of visualization, if you know what I mean. Exactly. How are you in the middle of a match at 8-all and you get a bad refereeing decision, is a perfect way to practice how you're going to handle that, which isn't always the case, that you do handle it well if you haven't been there.
I'm really trying to bring in a lot of the emotions, the thought, the lack of focus. So something happens, something disrupts your rhythm, and all your emotions come to the surface. And I think actually revisiting that before it happens and actually taking yourself to this emotional place and go, right, I've visited it, but now I'm going to put the solution in place, because when that is about to happen in a match, I've rehearsed what I'm going to do to replace it. And I think that there's quite a bit of powerful evidence coming out that that's becoming quite a big thing. So yeah, I'm really curious to explore that more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes so much more sense, doesn't it, that you get a bad call or you make an error at 9-all, and how do you bounce back from that? Because that's really what visualization is, isn't it? It's a tool to bounce back from difficult situations or prepare on how to deal with difficult situations that pop up, and that's great.
Yeah. So this might link in kind of a couple of questions here, because I'm conscious of your time and you have been amazing, and people I'm sure are going to be lapping this up. So before we started recording, you told me quite an interesting story about Mark Campbell, who I've had the luxury to interview, which is great. I'm their physical trainer, EIS. And it might be a little bit linked into what you talked about with the dancing thing that you prepared for the match, but also linking a little bit of this idea about mental preparation for match play. So, do you want to start with the story of Mark Campbell first, and see where we can make some links?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was trying to say before was about how Mark was unbelievable actually at getting you to perform from a physical perspective, but taking quite a lot of the mental pressure off you. So with me, it was always wanting to do well. I always wanted to better my score, always wanted to give it my all. That's really difficult when you're in the gym and you're setting targets every week, basically. So I go in the gym, and I remember this particular day we'd we'd had planned a 12-minute bike ride where you just covered as much distance as you could in 12 minutes. I think I'd done it maybe, let's say, a month before, and it's a horrible, horrible session because effectively you've just got to push really hard from the start to the end, and 12 minutes is a long time when you're in pain. It's a really, really tough session, running as well. So we'd gone in, I'd done it. It was during a training block. So obviously we'd done it at the start, and you're a bit more relaxed because you're like, yeah, I'm just setting my boundaries and don't want to go too hard because I've got to have to beat it. But then the competitiveness comes out, and I go into the gym this day, and I'm a month down the line with my training, and he says, right, we're going to retest the 12-minute bike ride today. And I go, oh, actually today's not a great day. I'm feeling fairly tired. Had a bit of a tough league match last night, and maybe we should just leave it till next week when I can give it a proper go, because I want to try and beat my score, and I want to be fresh. And he just looks at me and goes, it's all right. Let's just look at it as a training thing, 12-minute training bike ride before you start your weight session. So no pressure. If you don't beat it, at least we know where you're at. And, if you're rubbish, we can always do it again next week. You're like, cheers, Mark, brilliant. I just wanted him to say, yeah, no worries, we'll do it next week. But in some ways, really happy as well, because I'm like, just get it out of the way, get it done. Let's see it. So off I go to the bike, and he's sneaky as well with his mindset, because he's given me all the numbers of like the best females that he's ever worked with that has done it in the gym. This boxer who got this distance, I can't remember what it was. If you can beat that, you'd be the best that I've ever seen do it. I'm like, I'm a squash player. I've got to be better than a boxer. So no offense to boxing, she'd knock me out. But so I get on this bike, and I'm like, right, all you can do is, Danny and I always have this saying when I was doing court sprints, all you can do is put your next foot in front of the other, and then that one stride leads to two, leads to one length, leads to two lengths, leads to 20, whatever. But all you can do is, can you do the next stride? Yes, I can. We'll do the next stride. And he would quite often stand on court sprints and watch me do sessions and go, can you do the next stride? Come on, next stride, next stride, next stride. And you get more out of yourself. So I thought, that's it. Just break it down into minutes. Off you go. Got my headphones on. I'm not looking at anyone. He sets me off, and off I go for this 12 minutes. And then I'm just feeling a bit kind of like, the first 3 or 4 minutes is going to be okay, because you're fairly fresh and you go in and you've got your average. So he's told me the average watts for this boxer. So I know I've got to keep my level above this level of wattage to beat this boxer. So the first 3 or 4 minutes, I'm smashing it. Obviously, you've got to be way above the average watts, because you're going to drop off a cliff. So I'm smashing it. I'm like, this is it. And then I just start to hit a wall, and slowly but surely the watts are dropping. And I've got my music on, and this song just kicks in I've never heard before. And it was the words. They're really loud, the words, and it's called Supergirl, and it's by Anna McLab, I think. I'd never heard it before. And I just literally put that song on repeat for the rest of the 12 minutes. And it was like, you are a supergirl. You got home late last night, but you're a supergirl. All these words just made sense. And I'd been at a league match. I'd got home last night late, and I was just like, I can do it. I'm a supergirl. And I got off, and I smashed it. I smashed my own score, and I beat this boxer's score, which is what, was amazing. And I guess when you talk about, obviously we talked about this before we came on air, but it was really about how then that impacted my belief for my squash, because from that day, I realized that there was more mental push in me to get more out of myself, even when I wasn't feeling great, because to be able to put in that performance, I mean, Mark literally he was like, you're lying. You're literally lying to me. I'm never going to believe you again. And I'm like, no, I wasn't. I swear I wasn't. I'm knackered. I'm tired. He was like, this is ridiculous. And so I think that was what I took from it. That was, if I'm not feeling great on a match day, or if I've had a hard match the day before, I've had a late night, or if I'm feeling a bit fatigued, that I can actually still raise it for that match that day because of knowing that I did do that day.
Yeah, and well, it links to what we started talking about, self-belief and cultivating that side of you. And I believe that that song made quite a impact on you later on as well. Did you use it often for match preparation?
Yeah, I probably would still stick it on now if I needed to get through a session, and it's going to always carry memories with me. But I had a playlist that I warmed up to for I think probably from about 2015, that very rarely changed. The odd song got added if it really, but that I could put that playlist on now and something in me would be getting a bit twitchy because it's my warm-up playlist, and it was just on repeat every single match for every single tournament. And that was on it from that day. And yeah, it's like, memories with music and smells and things like that. I would get twitchy. I'd be like, oh, I don't want to listen to this playlist because it's got so many good and bad memories attached to it.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. That's again linking to the brain and why we're having these conversations today. There's a little bit of me that links to visualization, and you've replayed that moment, and you're strengthening the synapses and the nerves in the brain, and
Yeah,
all of these things that go into it and that. So, but I think a good place for us to start to wrap this up is something amazing that's coming up in your life. We touched on it in part one, but let's have a good chat about your amazing book coming up. So, frame it up for us. Tell us what it's about. Can you tell us the title first of all?
Yeah, so the book is going to be called All In, and it's basically my autobiography and runs the length of, when I started. Obviously, I've talked a lot about my dad. There's a couple of fairly harsh stories in there to start. I had to tone them down, thought he might never speak to me again. So I toned them down in terms of, and actually, like I said before, a really good kind of process of writing the book was the editor said to me, why don't you actually ask your dad's perspective on this story? Because if you're going to put it in the book and it's quite a harsh story, then you need to make sure, like, let's put his perspective in as well. Because I have a good relationship with my dad now. I've always had a good relationship with my dad, but there is definitely kind of probably the better. It's gone better as I've got older, which is a great thing. Sometimes that can be the other way around. So there's a couple of stories in there about when I was a junior and spoke to him and got his perspective, which was really interesting. And so that's in there as well. The book itself has got guest chapters from Mark Campbell, from Danny, from DP, from Peter, who have talked about a lot. Like he touches upon the organic belief change, the Enneagram, how they helped me over my career, what I've done. And they all read their own chapters in the audio book, which is brilliant. And we actually have an audio, like we have a Q&A with each guest in the audio book. Because of lockdown, it's been a struggle. We've also got Jade and Caroline in there from a physio and fasciotherapy point of view, my manager, Faye, and hoping to get them still to record their own, but some really good guest chapters in there. And then the book sort of just runs my career. I mean, it's brilliant. This chat talks a lot about, how I started out on tour, a bit of the invisible pecking order that goes on. How do you all of a sudden get from that I don't really believe to I believe? Because at some point, to believe that you can win, you have to believe that you can win. But to believe you can win, you have to have sometimes done it, which is the hardest bit. So, getting through that, how do you do that? It goes through winning the Worlds and the British Open, and then getting to world number one, and then into my retirement, I guess. So yeah, just the full story. It's squash based, obviously, but hopefully a lot more than that from a woman in sport perspective. And really excited. So it's going to be out on audiobook, Kindle, and paperback, with maybe some signed hardbacks available in limited edition. And there'll be it's available to pre-order, hopefully from my website. So I'm sure we can get a link out there to order that, pre-order from the start of April for release on the 1st of June.
Definitely. I'm just a bit curious to stay with this a bit. How was the process of writing, jumping into that? And what did you like most about the journey of, did you have to learn a bit new of a skill set, the audio recording as well? Talk to us about that process.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the done thing or not for most people, but I've got diary upon diary from pretty much the start of my career. A lot of them are just feelings after results and tournaments. So there's a lot of diary entries in the book as well. So that took me months and months of just delving through diaries and stories and key things that had happened, typing them all up for them to go in. That was, kind of nice. And the reason that I did it, I always thought, if I can do this, it was not from the very, very start of my career, unfortunately, but from about midway through, I've probably got a stack of about 10 diaries where I've just talked about my feelings and results and how I feel after wins, how I feel about after losses. And with the thought of, if I ever write a book, these all come in really handy, which
Brilliant.
obviously they have done. And there's some stories in there. Danny, at the start of Danny's book, he tells a story about how we had this huge bust up after the Worlds in Sharm el Sheikh, and the diary entry from there is in it, and things like that. And actually, strangely, I don't even mention the argument. I just mention how terrible I played, and then went off on a massive rant about how pathetic person that I was. And so that's all in there, and all the diary entries and stuff right up to the end. And yeah, just so that itself has been quite therapeutic, getting all them out, digging it out. It's been a long process, a lot of talking. Obviously wrote it in conjunction, like with Rod Gilmore, and Eleanor Preston edited it to kind of really make it feel a bit more like it was me as a woman, which is great. And they've both done an amazing job. So it was kind of therapeutic, and yeah, I'm excited. The audiobook itself was, what do you do? Do you pay someone with a really nice neutral accent to come in and, do the book? Or do you just put me in there with my Lancashire accent and go for it?
It's much
And
more
I
authentic.
figured,
I love it. I personally, just on that, so I did jump in. All the audiobooks, I love audiobooks, but I actually seek out the author who reads their own book. I think there's something special about that. So I'm really glad to hear you've done that.
I absolutely agree. And that's why I went for it. I thought there's probably going to be about, hopefully, maybe 10 or 20% of people that go, I can't listen to this. She's a nightmare with her accent. But there'll also be a lot of people who will go, it feels real because it's you. And one of the best autobiographies I read, who read her own book for a high profile person, was Maria Sharapova. And hearing it in her voice, and the book's great anyway. I don't know if you've read it. I loved her autobiography. But the fact that she sat down and gave that time to the book just makes you actually want to buy the book even more, because
Totally.
she's given herself. I haven't finished the audiobook recording yet, because it's because of lockdown, but that's quite obviously with the audiobook, it can be done that day and out. So we're just wrapping up a few ends of that. Obviously it'll be done by the time it's released, this podcast released, but it's basically just settling down into a rhythm and really feeling like, kind of you're getting into that rhythm, and you're speaking quite clearly, and putting just a tiny little bit of passion into those points that really mean a lot to you, or the way a word is said, that someone who's reading it for you just can't know that. So I'm excited.
The nuances of reliving those moments. And this sounds absolutely brilliant. I love the amount of depth and detail you've gone to look at your training diaries, taking yourself down memory lane. And I can imagine there was lots of bits going, completely forgot about that. And oh, what a cool thing to go and relive in that. So it sounds like what you've put on paper and also Audible is such a deep dive. You've taken, and again, I love sports autobiographies and stuff, but it really sounds like you've gone to the real depths, gone to the well, and put so much in there. So man, I am going to be ordering that very quickly as soon as it comes out. And I hopefully speak for a lot of people. It's going to be the same in a way. And all I can do is wish you a huge amount of luck with it, because it's so insightful. I can imagine it's going to be one of those books that, this is the biggest compliment, it might frustrate me because I don't think I'll be able to listen to it from start to finish. Because when I get a good book like that, I go through it so slowly. I take notes. I then do some lessons on those. And actually, sometimes I just want to listen to a book from start to finish. But for me, it sounds like this book is going to be one of those that I'm going to sit with and come back to and take notes and digest and that. So in closing, just remind us the release dates, where we can get it, when's it going to be available, how, all the platforms. So give a good shout out for that.
Yeah, well, firstly, I hope it's as good as you're making out, because it's so hard to write a book. And when I'm talking on this podcast, getting stories over is so easy. And you talk about stories, it's so hard in a book to link everything together and also to get everything out. Because you're reading it, you don't want it to be an encyclopedia. It's got to be wrapped up in a certain amount of pages. So yeah, I hope I've done everything justice. And yeah, the book will be available to order from my website for sure. Amazon, definitely. We're just in the process of getting everything nailed down with Audible and Kindle, which will be on Amazon as well. Mm-hmm. We're currently in the process of negotiating with Waterstones, so watch this space for that. But the pre-order will definitely be available from my website from the beginning of April, and from Amazon and my website released fully on the 1st of June, which is exciting.
Amazing. And yeah, as I said, when these podcasts come out, it's going to be linked in very close to that. So hopefully anyone who's listening at this moment is either getting it or pre-ordering at the time, or if it's in reflection, doing it from there. Listen, Laura, there was probably another 3 or 4 questions I had in regard to goal setting and Shabini, that loss there, and a bit more mental match play. But look, hopefully that means that we can open the door for future conversations, because I just think there's so many angles we can go down. I've set up a chat with Danny again kindly, and I think there's I think there's like 9 messages I got to reply to him about that he sent yesterday. But it's been an absolute delight again, and I've just again enjoyed going with this deeper dive. Hope you've had a good time of it. And listen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, it's been fun. It's nice to delve deep and back into some of those memories. So thanks for having me. And buy the book, everyone.
Buy the book. Again, recommendation for both of us. Presence, process, persistence, the essence of Squash Mind.